I think it's a good time to go out there and take risks. There are a lot of good projects that need financing. I don't think there is any underlying inflation in the system. Overall, there is clearly space for easier monetary policy.
What are the two new habits?
None. I have actually worked right through every weekend.
Your favorite book there?
Rizad Kapuscinski, Peter Hopkins. Then Amish, who has just come out with a book on Suhail Dev. Ashwin Sanghi's book, I think it's called Vishnu's Vault. Vikram Sampath's book on Savarkar. There's also Catherine Nixie's book on the Darkening Age.
On your taste of music and movies?
One was Tanaji. And last year there was Uri. I like listening to hard rock. There's a band called Agam. I like a lot of Vedic chanting that I listen to.
Are you more into spiritual and healthy practice like meditation, or more exercise and running and a sports player kind?
I do a lot of martial arts. I'm a black belt in Taekwondo, squash, and badminton, and I keep getting injured quite a lot. But yeah, I keep at it.
Thank you, Dr. Sanyal, for giving us time here. It's a pleasure to have you for India Podcast listeners and viewers on our show today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Dr. Sanyal, I would want to begin asking you a question that we all now have learned to survive with COVID-19 in the last 4 months. We are in a space where we still find the virus being discovered every day. We're still looking out as a vaccine race that has begun. But a great achievement by this government has been, we took a very pragmatic and much applauded approach of looking at the crisis from a health point of view, not in isolation as an economic crisis alone. So has this worked out in favor for addressing this issue?
So I think you need to think about how we were in March in order to understand how we have been dealing and the kinds of decisions we have been taking. Remember, much of what I will talk about is about trying to make decisions in an environment of utter uncertainty where the situation is evolving all the time. So if you go back to the middle of March, we didn't have too much information about what exactly was happening on the health side. We knew that something fairly bad had happened in Wuhan and that it was spreading to Italy and was killing a lot of people there. But beyond that, we really didn't have too much information. So, of course, like every government, we asked for opinions from experts and we got a very wide range of outcomes. There were very negative ones which suggested that hundreds of millions of people would be infected and lakhs of people would die and so on by maybe by June. And then there were others who took the opinion that it was nothing much more than a bad flu. So the one thing we understood from that conversation was that there was a very wide range of possible outcomes. And of course, other countries did the same thing. Now, many other countries took the approach of choosing one or the other view. And some, you'll remember the UK went for herd immunity. There was a Swedish model. The Singaporeans opted for a particular model and then changed halfway and so on. Now, we don't in India have that luxury because we are stuck with having to choose one path and then we have to plod along with it because we have 1.3 billion people. It's very difficult to change direction. So what do we do? So we did what is called a barbell strategy. Those from a finance background will know what a barbell strategy is. What you do is you hedge for the very worst outcome, and then you basically step by step move forward through a feedback loop. So that's what we did. We did a full lockdown right in the beginning. Yes. That's not because we were dead sure exactly how things would pan out. Of course we didn't know. But it bought us time to get information, put in place some quarantining, testing ability, gather information from other people and other countries that were further down the curve, and come up with some sort of a response. And then since then, we have been, as we get better information, unwinding it. Now we have unwound it quite a long way along the path. Not fully unwound, but we are clearly a long way away from where we were earlier. Now, this is what explains a question which very often comes up, which is, why is it that when we now have a lot more infections that we actually are unwinding when we were willing to do a huge lockdown, a complete lockdown, when we have very few infections. Well,
exactly, and more testing has started.
And not just more testing, we have a much better sense of what we are dealing with, how to deal with it, quarantining. We, for example, now know that this disease, although it's extremely infectious, is perhaps not quite as dangerous for the average person as we may have initially feared. It's still very dangerous for certain demographics, but overall it may not be as bad as maybe the worst forecasts have been. So it allows us to make certain educated trade-offs between the economy and needs of health. So the point is, anybody who is seeing it only as a static, one-time approach has completely missed the point of what we are doing. We are basically, if you are faced with complete uncertainty, the way to go about it is you hedge for the worst and then you respond in a feedback loop. Now that's exactly what we have done in the economy, by the way. So we have done the same thing. So basically what we do is you hedge for the worst. We made sure that the very poorest people in the country got food. Some money was transferred into their bank accounts. They got, so that it could cook the food. They had some gas, for example, being delivered. And we now have extended that food thing right to November. So, there is a safety net in there. This is not going to solve poverty. This is just a safety net. The same thing is true for the rest of the economy. We have created, moratoria on the banking side. We have created 100% guarantee for loans for MSMEs. We pushed back various financial and tax deadlines. These are all cushioning the shock from this lockdown. This is not the way we are going to rebuild. That time will also come. But
so I want to know from there, is this the unwinding phase as we understand, but is it the rebuilding stage where you wanted to step into rebuilding the economy? Because the psyche of people is going to play an important role. Awareness is there, but fear psychosis has not died down, and real consumption is totally concerned with people actually stepping out to buy, because the demand has to be real and not just driven by the credit demand.
So you're absolutely right. So this is exactly what we have to take into account. So for example, many other countries had a one big bang approach to putting a response in. So trillions of dollars up front, backstopping the whole economy. We have taken, again, a very different approach. We have instead been much more cautious and calibrated, because our focus was on providing that first cushion or safety net. That is what we focused on. I described some of the steps to you.
Yes.
Guarantee, direct transfer of foods, and so on. Now, supposing we had taken what many other people thought we should have done, which is maybe a huge basic income kind of approach, transfer large amounts of money, and then try to trigger demand. Now, my own view is, what's the point of doing that? Because after all, we are ourselves shutting down the economy because of a health problem. What's the point of giving a large amount of money out when you are not allowing anybody to spend it? So this is like putting, pressing the accelerator while pressing the brake. So that completely would have had no use at all. In fact, the amounts of money that we have even transferred to the very poor, which is a limited transfer, even there, our studies suggest most of it gets saved. So there will be a population who are in very dire need, who will probably end up spending even the little money we give them. But for the bulk, if you give them money, they will just simply save it, because of exactly the kinds of uncertainty that you just described. People don't rush out to spend when they are feeling uncomfortable about their job security and other things. And of course, all the malls are shut.
How will you match this? I mean, the complete stalling of the demand process, won't it become difficult to then propel it or bring it? The growth trajectory would take a decade then to find its normalcy back. And we have stepped into it after a slowdown in the economy. So is it going to...
So there is a case about doing things in certain sensible sequence. For example, in the US, large checks were sent out. Some were spent, but a very large proportion has ended up getting used up. Sending out, simply distributing money is a cost. Remember, eventually you have to repay it as taxpayers, and future generations have to pay interest on it. So none of this is free. So if you use up all your ammunition up front, doing whatever it is that you're suggesting, then you have to be sure that you ran up that debt in order to achieve that objective that you wanted to achieve was achieved. The point I'm making to you is we were calibrated because, remember, we have to do all this spending at a time that our own revenues are constrained. So we have to be very careful about what we do. That doesn't mean that we are not willing to do it, or we do not see the need to support demand. We have some space, particularly on the monetary side, but even on the fiscal side, we have more space than people think. Our debt to GDP ratio is much lower than that of virtually every developed country in the world. So we have some space, but that space has to be sensibly used and not simply, oh, we have a demand problem, let's sort of transfer money out. Okay, let's do that. And then supposing you don't get your second order demand expansion, what will you do? Especially when you have deliberately stopped people from spending it, by the way, by shutting down avenues for expenditure. So you have to be very careful with this.
So will
that doesn't mean that we will not. So that does not mean that we will not come to a rebuild phase. And that phase, we are now approaching it. And you will have heard both from the governor and the FN that there will be a time to go out and do that. Obviously, one major element of that has got to be an infrastructure build-out. And we have said that repeatedly and hinted at that.
And even vaccine? Will vaccine play an important role? We all are mentioning that.
Well, vaccine is a parallel thing here. Obviously, it helps to have a vaccine. But the fact of the matter is, even with or without a vaccine, we have to now we'll have to get to live with this in some way. And as we are opening things up, even without a vaccine, we now are confident that we can manage it to a significant degree, that we can go back to work. Other countries are doing it too. It's nothing unique to us. And we can begin to build out, open out various things, and particularly infrastructure. In fact, we have already seen in some of the states, major infrastructure projects are getting actually fast-tracked because the traffic is low or whatever. Even same thing is happening, by the way, in railways. You may have heard the railway minister, Piyush Goyal, talk about how the fact that we have lower traffic and actually allowed certain major projects to actually get done, which normally would have been extremely difficult to do. So there is understanding of this. We also need to get also private investment back on track. I don't think you should think about that as something we should forget. There is effort being put into getting FDI back into India. The world's supply chains are getting reorganized, and we have to be a part of that. The Prime Minister has clearly stated that this is a priority for us. So that is something that we will put in a lot of effort into.
A lot is there to come by the rebuilding stage. It's gearing to there, but we are definitely looking at that. I bring in here Geetu Musa, who's a veteran market researcher with us on screen to take some questions with you, Mr. Sanyal there.
Thank you, Ankur. How are you, sir?
Very well.
So let's talk about the banking space now. For any economic recovery to really happen, the banking system needs to be quite robust. And as far as this government is concerned, banking reforms have been high on agenda. And till recently, I mean, early to 2020 also, the things were looking very good, very positive for our banking space. Now with COVID coming in, things are looking a little difficult. And banks now have been asking for a recapitalization package. Lately, we had reports also coming in. So now in this state, is government in the position to really recapitalize banks? What is that is being strategized for banks now?
So there are the issue about recapitalization will only happen when the impact of increased NPAs from this episode actually hit the system. They haven't done so. We are still within the moratorium phase, and then after the moratorium phase, there will be a phase where these NPAs will come. We have tried to again minimize this to the extent possible by extending, for example, 100% guarantee from our side to MSME. So those hopefully that incremental lending is guaranteed by us. We have found other means as well to try and make sure that there is no cascade of NPAs that shoots up in the system. So capitalization is somewhat further down the track. What we now currently need to do is, as we just discussed, we need to go into the rebuild phase. And during the rebuild phase, we need to make sure that the banking system is in a position to support and lend money. And for that, the banks actually do have resources, something like 6 to 7 lakh crores of resources are being put by the banks into reverse repo, as you may be aware.
Yeah.
So this finance is available, and a significant proportion of that is backed by the government through guarantees of various kinds. And as hopefully we begin to rev up the economy, this money will get sucked out. So I think the immediate issue here is to encourage the banks to go out there and take risk. I think it's a good time to go out there and take risk. There are a lot of good projects that need financing. And as we open things up and begin to leverage the economy, many of, we need to make sure that the economy has the financing backbone to accelerate growth again.
With IBC on hold for a year now because of the COVID, and it is obvious that it would not have been possible for the reformers to really go in for taking the cases to IBC. Now, do we see restructuring as the only thing left with the banks to really push in that, like you just said, that we have to encourage the banks to lend, but lending will only come when banks have some kind of an their concerns are addressed as far as the NPAs are concerned. So can we see that a restructuring plan be the only thing that banks will now opt for?
So obviously there were already a significant number of IBC cases already there. And so whatever we do, we are not going to, that process continues, and those cases still have to go through the IBC. But yes, it is true that, it would not be fair to drag companies that were hit by this completely extraneous shock. Otherwise, good companies and profitable companies should be dragged into this through this grind. So every effort will be made to make sure that the productive capacity of the economy is not impaired permanently as a result of this one-time shock. That doesn't mean that there are the cases from before, which were even before were not viable. They don't have to go through the IBC process. They do. And even after all the arrangements and things that we now are going to make, and of course the Reserve Bank spends a lot of time thinking about this issue. Even then, there will be some cases where we will have to allow those cases at some future date to go through the IBC process. The IBC process is an important part of the creative destruction of any economy. So we don't want to unnecessarily keep it in abeyance forever. It is important that it allows the restructuring. It's a part of the continuous restructuring of the economy. But as I said, this one-time shock should not, cause a cascade of defaults that ends up and jams up the IBC process. That's also not a good idea. So, keeping both these things in mind, a reasonable path will be found. And so the IBC process remains in the medium to long term the backbone of our ability to deal with non-performing assets. But yes, some one-time arrangement may be done. We have to be careful, of course, here that we do not allow too much of a misuse of it. So this is something that we have to be careful about. We have in the past done this, and in fact, one of the reasons we ended up with the banking problem even before this was because when we had the crisis in the economic crisis of 2007, 2008, a lot of not viable companies ended up getting even more resources, which they shouldn't, and then they all loaded up by 2013-14. They all ended up at NPAs, and then we have spent many years cleaning it up. So we do not want to sort of create the basis of a future banking crisis either. But a reasonable approach needs to be taken in order to be able to move forward.
Last question from my side would be rate cut. I mean, we have seen a rate cut of around 140 basis points by RBI. And do you expect there's more rate cuts to come? I mean, there's scope for more cuts?
Well, obviously, that is the prerogative of the Monetary Policy Committee and of the Reserve Bank of India. My own view, which is well known, is that I don't think there is any underlying inflation in the system. Whatever inflation may be there, may be happening because of supply disruptions that have happened because of the lockdown. And you can see that in the big gap between the CPI and the WPI. Clearly WPI is a negative territory, suggesting that there is simply no demand inflation in the system. So if it is popping up in CPI, it just means that's because of the supply disruption. And as the supply disruption gets eased up, CPI will come down. And in fact, if anything, CPI in India overstate inflation. Real estate prices, for example, we know for a fact is down 15 to 20% in most of India. And so from where it was a year ago. And that doesn't fully reflect into the CPI because of the way the CPI is calculated. So the point is, inflation is not an issue in the economy given the demand dynamics. So consequently, it should not be a part of. So that gives us one major sort of degree of freedom on the monetary. The other degrees of freedom are that globally, liquidity is likely to be very, very easy for a prolonged period of time. The Fed has clearly signaled that they will keep monetary policy reasonably easy for at least 24 months from here. That again, so therefore we know that global capital remains cheap for a prolonged period of time. And the third constraint, which sometimes comes up, is on the exchange rate. That if you cut rates, the exchange rate will slide down. That is also not the issue. The rupee is, if anything, under tremendous pressure right now to appreciate, and the Reserve Bank is actually intervening to sort of slow that down. So we are accumulating reserves quite rapidly. And the rupee, in fact, if the Reserve Bank gets out of the way, would actually pop back to much higher levels than it is right now against the dollar. But I mean, if the pressure remains, of course, it's a managed float, so it will keep drifting stronger. But for our limited issue about monetary policy discussion, the rupee too, as far as it does not have any downward pressure to stop any monetary easing. So overall, there is clearly space for easier monetary policy. Now, of course, what is done depends on the MPC. But I will say that there is also a secondary issue which is important, and that is of transmission. Until very recently, that transmission was not very smooth, but we are beginning now to see transmission happening. You are, for example, while the central government borrowing at the 10-year yield rate is still quite high at 5.8%. At the shorter yields, at the shorter tenors, it has come down very, very substantially. For example, for below 1 year, we are now borrowing at 3.4 or something like that percent. That's quite low. It's a historic low. Even in below 5 years, it's come down a lot. It's also now fed through to the state government borrowing rates, and also further on to some of the better corporates are now borrowing at historically low interest rates. So that feed through is happening. You are seeing also consumer borrowing happening at much lower rates than before. For example, if you tried to buy a car or a house right now, you would probably get a loan at below 8%. Those kind of things. But there are parts of the economy where interest rates are still high. NBFC lending to MSMEs, for example, remains. You can still find people borrowing at well above 10%, 12, 13% is still, you find that. And that has to be brought down to allow the transmission. So there is the transmission problem is now not a problem of liquidity not flowing through and credit not flowing through. It is now a spread problem. It's a credit risk issue now, not monetary easing. So that credit risk part will hopefully get sorted to some extent. We have tried, as you know, we have created this 20% guarantee, first loss guarantee for NBFC paper. So that's one way we are dealing with it. There's another way we are dealing with it through creating a sub-debt fund. There's, of course, the SPV that has been put together as a buyer of last resort of NBFC paper. And of course, the 100% guarantee for 3 lakh crores worth of MSME loans. And so we are dealing with it in different ways. If more needs to be done, please let us know, and we'll be happy to find other ways of dealing with this issue.
We are going to look into the gold deposit scheme, something that we saw recently announced in news of the government.
So various things are being done, but gold deposit scheme, again, it does not solve this credit problem of transmission. Okay. So that brings in more resources perhaps but it doesn't solve the problem that maybe in the minor way of maybe using gold as a collateral to some personal lending, but that won't solve the problem of credit risk taking.
Mr. Sanyal, before I let you skip out, one thing I definitely want to take from you is a very quick question and answer from you, very, very quick, is in this whole phase of lockdown period we have all experienced first time, what are the 2 new habits that Mr. Sanyal has adopted as a new normal way of his life?
None. I have actually worked right through every weekend throughout this process. So I have had no time to breathe through it. We are very well aware of the economic challenges we face, and somebody has had to work to keep the economy running through it. So it happens to be that I'm one of those people. So I have worked flat out throughout this process.
So I need to then know, you're a historic lover. You have yourself written books. Can you tell us your favorite book there that you have been reading by? I'm sure you got that moment, or you can suggest the viewers that these are 2 books you think we should go by.
So I read a lot of books. I have very eclectic tastes in reading books. So I can tell you some of my favorite authors. I read in terms of international writers, I like a Polish writer called Ryszard Kapuscinski. And there is a British writer called Peter Hopkirk, so I always like reading their books. Then there have been some new books by some of my friends who are Indian contemporary writers, like Amish, who has just come out with a book on Suhail Dev. And there is Ashwin Sanghi's book, I think it's called Vishnu's Vault, which is quite interesting. So yeah, I've been reading that. And then very early on during this crisis, I read Vikram Sampath's book on Savarkar, which is absolutely excellent. And there's also Catherine Nixie's book on the Darkening Age. So plenty of books out there, which I have read in recent times, some just before this lockdown, but some through the course of the lockdown.
I hope we see some of your books come out soon on economy or pandemic experience there. If you're working on it, I don't know if you're working on some book right now.
No, I don't have time right now to think about anything at all. Hopefully some of it will come out in the economic survey. So not in so much of a book, but in the economic survey, some of it will get reflected.
Last question on your taste of music and movies. I think this whole period we have all got tuned to music and movies like crazy. So anything that you pick on that keeps you peace with yourself? I
have not had time to watch very many movies through this, but I like watching some Bollywood films from time to time. Last couple of films that I really liked, one was Tanaji, and last year there was Uri. I'm not somebody who watches slow art films, so people have this impression of Bengali intellectuals liking to watch black and white slow-moving films. I hate it. And same thing with books. I mean, I don't watch. And
music. Any song of yours you keep humming to ease out yourself in this hectic time?
I like listening to hard rock. So I like Chris Rea. The Road to Hell. That's music. The kind of music I listen to. Or if I listen to Indian music, I listen to. There's a band called Agam, which you know. Yeah. I like Agam. What else do I listen to? I like Vedic. I like a lot of Vedic chanting that I listen to, and I also like listening to contemporary Bollywood films. So I'm not one who listens to 1960s old Bollywood music. That's not my scene. I like listening to contemporary Bollywood music.
Are you more into spiritual and healthy practice like meditation, or more exercise and running and a sports player kind?
Yes, I am. I play a lot of sports. I do a lot of martial arts. I'm a black belt in Taekwondo. I play a lot of racket sports like squash and badminton and so on. And I keep getting injured quite a lot, but yeah, I keep at it.
Quite a vibrant side to the kind of work you're doing. So thank you for letting us know into that space. And thank you so much, both of you, for your time, and especially Mr. Sanyal for giving me this time and opportunity to speak with you on India Podcast. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.